Hey, it's Charlie at Charlie Slybox, and today I'm going to tell you everything I know about dubbing. Dubbing is historically one of the things I get asked about most. No matter where I go, what I do, classes and so forth, classes, demos, people always ask about dubbing, and um, I tend to be pretty good at it. I've done it for a long time, and it's one of the things that I sort of use as a meter of how I tell if somebody's a very good tyer, is how well they can dub. I know a lot of guys that are pretty good tyers, pretty well-known tyers, that really don't dub all that hot, and they're always trying to find a way around dubbing or a substitute material. They use yarn or some other newfound synthetic material instead of dubbing, and all that tells me is that they never really learned to dub. And we don't want that to happen to you. So I'm going to tell you all I know about dubbing, and hopefully we're going to clear some of this up. So I'm going to just start at the beginning. I just said I think I said 34 minutes is what I think this is going to take. We'll see how close I come out on that. So just buckle up. We've got about 33 more minutes worth of me talking about fur. So to start with, dubbing in fly tying is a noun and a verb. The noun is the actual product, the material, and that is always going to be fur of some sort, whether it's either natural or synthetic fur, and it can be a blend of the two. So it could be natural and synthetic mixed together. And it's cut off of the hide, like I've just got a rabbit strip here. You can cut it off the hide or pull it off the hide, and you'll have a little clump of fur like this. Now the catch when you pull it straight from the hide is those fibers are all relatively aligned. They're all lengthwise there. So when you go to dub this in, you'll have, you would start with these long coarse guard hairs and end up with these short fine underfur at the bottom of your dubbing noodle. So what you'd want to do to remedy that is to mix that dubbing or blend it. And you can do this with a can of air in a Ziploc bag. We've got a video out on that. You can do it with a coffee grinder, or you can just, for a small pinch, you can just do it in your hands. And you can see I'm just sort of restacking this dubbing, just pulling it apart and putting it back together to blend a little batch of dubbing. And what that does is intermixes the guard hairs and the underfur so that it's all mixed together and kind of go in all different directions, so that I don't have all one type or length of fur in any one spot. It's just kind of mixed together. And that is what you buy when you buy mixed, prepackaged mixed dubbing. It's already mixed for you. It's cut off and mixed. So that is the noun part. And there's a lot of different types of dubbing. I kind of break them down into four different categories. So you've got short dubbing, long dubbing, fine dubbing, and coarse dubbing. And that's really the gist of all the 8 million packages of dubbing in this store. All fall into that category somewhere between. Now, one of the cool things is you can mix those too. Sometimes you buy them mixed. Some of them will be a long coarse fiber and a short fine fiber. Some will be maybe a long fine fiber and a short coarse fiber. And that's just going to give you different effects on the hook. It's not to say that you can't sort of substitute any old thing in here and there. I wouldn't necessarily substitute, say, fine beaver dubbing, which is a fine natural dubbing, fine short natural dubbing, for Arizona semi-seal dubbing, which is a long coarse synthetic blend dubbing, just not the same effect. But you could certainly substitute and interchange superfine dubbing, beaver dubbing, muskrat dubbing in appropriate colors. You could interchange those. They're going to be much the same effects, slightly different textures, but very similar. So there's a lot of leeway there. But basically, the gist of it being is that they're going to be about four different kinds. There's going to be short, long, coarse, and fine. And that is kind of where I'm going to start. Just as an example, I'm going to put my glasses on here so I can show you this. Just as an example, in the world of fly tying, the verb part of dubbing is the act of twisting that fur onto your thread. And dubbing is probably best described as tangling. If you think of it as tangling the material around the thread, that's what we're trying to do. I see a lot of people in fly tying class make a very nice tight noodle of dubbing right next to their thread, and it's not on the thread. The idea is that the dubbing goes onto the thread. So I'm going to use some brightly colored thread here and just attach it to this hook. And just to start off with, I'm going to take some of this tan beaver dubbing. This is Stephen Hankins' sheared beaver. It's got no guard hairs in it. He's picked out most of the guard hairs already for us. Guy's got a lot of time on his hands. He's got a new baby at home, so he should have plenty of time on his hands now. But you can see this is a very short staple length, and the staple length is the actual length of those individual fibers. They're very short. These are probably 1/4 to a 1/2 inch long. So fairly short, very fine dubbing. This is going to be most appropriate for small nymphs, small dry flies. It's not going to build up very quickly, so works very nicely on small flies. It's not going to work so hot on a big fly, or it's not that it won't work on a big fly, you're just going to have to apply more of it and probably make a longer strand than you really want to. If I was to go to apply this, and I'm going to show you, I guess now's as good a time as any, how I apply the dubbing. You can see I've been kind of fiddling with this dubbing and pulling it apart. When you buy a package of dubbing, they always come in these little Ziploc bags, and they tend to be packed pretty tight, or maybe you've got them stored in your drawer, and they're packed down and kind of compacted together. The first thing I'll do is I'll take that dubbing out and loosen it up a bit. So I just loosen it in my fingers to just loosen that bunch up a bit. Now I have pretty dry, smooth fingers. I don't do any manual labor. I have Max for that. So my hands are really soft and nice. So I don't really run into too much trouble with my fingers catching the thread. But if you've got rough fingers, an emery board is not a bad place to start. If you've got rough spots, that'll kind of wear those down off your fingers a little bit. So do that to start with, and wash your hands. That's another big thing that a nitpicky thing, a pet peeve of mine. If your fingers are even the littlest bit dirty, that's going to show onto your dubbing, especially on lighter color dubbing. So wash your hands, maybe put a little lotion on, and keep your hands nice and soft. If you work manual labor, you might have to quit your job to do this well. So that's up to you. The first thing I do, though, is I'm going to put a little bit of dubbing wax on my index finger. And I just take my dubbing wax and I touch my index finger to it a couple times, and then I'll touch my thumb and forefinger together. That gives me just a little bit of traction. It's just like licking your finger to turn the page in the newspaper. Y'all remember what newspapers are? Max doesn't know what a newspaper is. So a little bit of wax on your finger. This is just to give me traction. If I don't do that, my hands actually make a squeaky noise when I twist dubbing on. So a tiny little bit of dubbing wax on my fingers. And then I'm going to draw a length of thread out. For a size 18 hook, I've probably got 6 inches of thread there, 4 or 5 inches of thread. And what I'm going to do is I like to, and Max wants me to keep this hanging straight down so it stays in focus here on the camera, but I'm going to show you what I usually do with this is I will draw this thread out toward me. That way I can get started right up next to the hook. If you've got your thread hanging straight down, you can't get your fingers in here. I always see people in class trying to dub from the top to get close there. Don't go through that rigmarole. You can turn your vise and get your fingers right up close to the hook. And actually, I think doing that way might satisfy Max as well. So I'm going to take this dubbing and just get a loose little corner, just a sparse little corner here. And I'm going to get this started by rolling my thumb toward my index finger, toward the tip of my index finger, and I'm going to make long, tight rolls. Now, when you watch me do this, I'm going to kind of stop here while I talk. When you watch me do this, it looks like I'm doing this very lightly. When I am making these rolls, I'm rolling my thumb toward the tip of my index finger. I'm making a long roll, and I'm pinching literally about as hard as I can. As I've aged over the years, I've noticed that I have pretty good arthritis in my thumb joint right here, and I'm convinced it's from dubbing. The amount of pressure that I put on that joint over the years from twisting this dubbing on. So to restart that, you can see with that short fine dubbing, it's easy to remove. But if I take this clump of dubbing, I'm going to get just a little loose corner, like so, and I'm going to start that piece and get an anchor point. And I'll show this with a couple different kinds of dubbing, and we'll get a little better view of it as well. Once I get that started, I'm going to use my left hand here to distribute the dubbing as I twist with my right. So I'm going to feed the dubbing out of my left hand, and if I move my left hand faster, I can get a thinner strand of dubbing. You can see I've got a little knit in there. I can just start that over. So I'm making long rolls with my right hand, and I'm distributing with my left hand. So I'm just working down. When I get to about where I think I've got enough, I'm going to pull the main clump away and tighten up that end. Now, one of the things I look for, and hopefully let me reel some of this thread in here on the hook so I can get this back up on the camera. What I always try to shoot for is the ends, both the top and bottom of the dubbing. I want those to be very tight on the thread. And you can see that's a fairly consistent, even strand of dubbing. That's what we're shooting for. Occasionally you'll see somebody or read somebody, you don't see it much anymore, but back in the day, guys used to tell you that you could start your dubbing off really thin and then let it fatten up and kind of build a taper into the actual noodle of dubbing. I don't like doing that at all. what you end up with is nice tight dubbing down here at the beginning of your body, and then the dubbing toward the front is pretty loose and it loses its shape very easily. So I don't like doing that method. I like a thin, hard, tight strand of dubbing no matter what. Even if I'm going to pick it out, I try to use a thin, hard, tight strand of dubbing. And you can see I can kind of go over that. And then you'll always have a little bit of bare thread between your hook and your dubbing. So I use that thread to work back to where I'm going to start the dubbing, which in this case, just on this bare hook, I'm going to put it right at the bend. And then I can start to wrap forward. Now, one of the nice things with dubbing is it's one of the few materials that you can overlap without any consequence. If you had a hackle feather and you were wrapping it forward and kind of missed a spot and wanted to go back over it, you'd screw everything up. With dubbing, if I get it kind of a skinny spot, I could go back over it. I always try to think of wrapping dubbing like wrapping wire on a brassy or on a copper john. Just turns nice and neat right in a row. But as you come to start to build your taper, you can see how I can overlap that, and there's really no texture difference in there. It's not like wire where it's got smooth, even edges, and if you brush it out a bit, any edges that were there just disappear. So dubbing is the most malleable material you can use. Really nice. You can make little tiny flies that are buggy. You can make big flies out of it. Really pretty quick and easy. That's the general gist of it. I'm going to show you using a few different materials here as we go about it, but a thin, tight strand of dubbing that is tight on both ends is what we're shooting for. So I'm going to whip finish this, and then I'm going to work you through a few different kinds of dubbing. I might just do them all on the same hook here. So I'm going to get rid of that one. I'm going to get a bigger hook, and we'll walk through a few different kinds of dubbing. Now, just incidentally, I'm using A-dot unithread right here, which is a polyester thread that's corded. Corded thread, polyester corded thread, tends to grab dubbing the best out of any of the threads that you're going to use. So if your fly is dubbing intensive, you might be better off to go with a thread like unithread. It's just got a little bit more tooth and texture to it. It grabs the dubbing a little bit better. I think it holds the dubbing in place better than a smooth nylon thread like UTC, something like that. A smooth nylon thread is not going to grab the dubbing as well. It's not to say that you can't dub on it, but it just doesn't work as nicely. So I showed you the beaver dubbing. As an example of a long fiber, let's see, this one's already open, a long fiber synthetic, superfine, which is one of my favorite dubbings. If you follow along our page, you know I use superfine dubbing for everything. Superfine dubbing is a long fiber synthetic. It's polypropylene, and the staple length of this is about 1 to 1.5 inches long. It's a fairly long fiber. This is a long fine dubbing. So beaver was short fine. Superfine is a long fine dubbing. So very thin individual fiber, relatively long fiber. And to dub that, I would take, I got to remember I'm not covering this whole hook, a very small little pinch, a tiny little pinch. I have said this before. I'm going to leave that hanging. I say this in fly tying class every year. Back in the day when I was tied commercially, I tied 700 dozen size 20 RS2s out of one package of gray superfine dubbing. One package. That tells you how little dubbing you need on a size 18 or 20 fly. Tiny little flies don't need very much dubbing. The amount of dubbing I've got here looks like next to nothing, and you'll see when I apply it to this hook, it's going to go a lot further than you think. And I'm going to essentially go about it the same way. You can see I just drew out that corner, and I'm going to get one end started, and then I've got an anchor point, and I can kind of draw this out and work down so that I keep a nice, consistent, even diameter strand of dubbing. Oftentimes here at the bottom, that little loose bit, I can kind of push that back up and then tighten it down so it's got a nice crisp edge on it. And as I start to wrap this, you can see that was not very much dubbing, but I've covered, I don't know, gosh, 4 inches maybe of thread with a pretty thin strand. And you can see as I build this, I could cover this entire size 10 hook with this strand of dubbing. I don't want to necessarily do that, but I could just build a nice tight little body there. Now, if you look closely, hopefully the camera will pick it up with that hot orange thread and that lighter yellow colored dubbing. The thread actually shows through a bit, and it should. Your dubbing should be very thinly applied, especially on a small fly. But that's superfine dubbing. Fairly slick body, very tightly dubbed. Tends to make a hard body. So if you're wrapping a hackle over it, if you're tying hair on it, it doesn't lose its shape. It doesn't get compressed. It won't change shape as you fish it. That I think is the ultimate dubbing. You know, the most useful for me. I can use it on big applications, small applications, and it holds its shape the whole time. Short, fine, uh, even long, soft dubbings will lose their shape. Not a big deal on a fly like a leech. You know, a bigger deal on something like maybe a blooming olive nymph or a blooming olive dry for sure. So that's super fine dubbing there. Just since I've got this beaver dubbing here, I'm going to put a little bunch of that. This is just going to make a nice little illustrative point here when we get done with this hook. If I take a little bit of this tan beaver and do the same thing, and you'll note with the short fine dubbing, short stranded dubbing, I've got to keep my hands a lot closer together. You saw with the superfine I was able to draw my left hand down because I can sort of draw all those fibers out and keep them connected. With the short fine beaver dubbing, if I pull my hands apart very far, it comes right apart. So you've got to have your hands a lot closer together, or keep your hands a lot closer together as you dub that short fine dubbing. So just to show the difference in textures here. Now one of the things, if I brush that out, that beaver dubbing will brush out and get kind of fuzzy. Where that superfine dubbing is a long enough fiber, it goes all the way around the hook several times on each wrap, so it doesn't come out as buggy. You know, if that was on a size 18 hook, I'd have a nice little caddis larva right there. But that's a couple different textures there. Getting into, let's see, what else do we have here? I've got, this is some actually Australian possum dubbing, which is a longer coarse dubbing, and this is a natural dubbing, similar to hare's mask. I should talk about that while I'm at it. Hare's mask dubbing, if you're tying hare's ears or want a really buggy kind of brownish tan colored fly, hare's mask dubbing is perfect for it, but very, very few packaged hare's mask dubbings are going to be what you're really after. What you get out of a hare's mask that you don't typically get out of a package of dubbing, let me just cut a little pinch off of here. Hold this up here. You can see there's some very soft, fine underfur here at the base, and then there's these much coarser guard hairs. See if I can get those separated. Much coarser guard hairs and the soft, fine underfur. When you take the two of those and mix them together, that soft, fine underfur dubs onto the thread very nicely and carries those coarse guard hairs along with it. I'm just going to blend this little patch of this just for the sake of doing it since I've got it here. I'm just mixing it up in my hand. You can see how that's all crosshatched now. And I'll put a little shot of this on this thread. And this is going to come out very buggy. And again, because this is sort of maybe halfway between the superfine dubbing and the beaver dubbing as far as length goes, so I can spread my fingers just a little bit further apart, or spread my hands a little further apart. But you can see when I dub this, those longer guard hairs will start to poke out, and then I can pick those out and make that real buggy. And then back to that possum dubbing is going to be very similar, but even a little bit longer fiber. And you can see these tiny little bits that I'm using just to build little nubs to show the difference in texture and consistency. So not quite as buggy as the hare's mask dubbing. Softer guard hairs. Very similar in color though. I can hardly tell the difference between those two. I'm going to make Max fish this fly when we're done. You can buy hare's mask dubbing. Nature Spirit has I had this for the last couple years, packaged hare's mask dubbing. It's got a little bit of Antron in it, but it's got real hare's mask in it, which is unusual for most packaged hare's mask dubbing. Most dubbing that you buy that is labeled hare's mask is rabbit fur with guard hairs in it. It is essentially what I pulled off of that rabbit strip. It doesn't quite come out the same. So if I take a little bit of this hare's mask that's mixed with some Antron, you'll be able to see the Antron fibers when I pick this out. And again, you know, save for the superfine, all of these are very similar types of dubbing. You know, it's not going to be, you know, if Max and I were fishing and he said I used, you know, real hare's mask and I was using the packaged stuff from Nature Spirit, it's not that Max would catch any more fish than I would, because that would never happen. It would solely be because I'm a better angler. It's not because of the dubbing. So pretty interchangeable. You can see that that's got a little bit more shine to it because those long clear Antron fibers that are in there. Hopefully that's going to show up. We'll get a close-up of that. I can see it with my eyeball. So just different textures and different consistencies to those dubbings. We started with a synthetic, then we went to a short fine natural dubbing, a longer fine natural dubbing, and then a blend of natural and synthetic. Um, Another type of dubbing, this is sow scud dubbing, which comes from Wapsi, which is a blend of a lot of different stuff. This is possum, Antron, rabbit, um, super bright, and Antron. Yep. So two synthetics, two naturals. Fairly coarse stuff. Coarse dubbing doesn't tend to dub as tightly down onto the thread as fine dubbing does. So this is going to come out yet buggier than what we have been applying to this hook. And what I find with it is because it's a longer fiber, it's harder to get wrapped around the hook. The fiber is stiffer. So you've got to go, or harder to get wrapped around the thread, I should say. So you've got to make long rolls to get it all anchored down. And you'll see here when I wrap it, because I twisted it tightly onto the thread, it's going to make a nice tight noodle. But when I pick it out, it's going to have much longer strands that come out. You can see how that sort of veils back over that whole body. It's got a few different colors in it as well. So you're just starting to see some of the different textures that you get out of different dubbings. This is Nature Spirit Emergence dubbing, which is 100% Antron, trilobal Antron. So this is, remember back in the day, if you're old enough to remember Antron DuPont carpet fibers that they made so that they didn't mat together and your carpet didn't mat, that's exactly what this stuff is. It's a coarse, relatively short, I'd say half-inch staple length, relatively short but coarse synthetic fiber. And this is going to, again, because it's coarse, it's not going to twist around the thread as nicely as, say, beaver dubbing might. So it's going to come out a little bit buggier, a little bit shaggier on the thread. Remember that superfine dubbing went on and looked just like fuzzy thread, just a little bit of texture to the thread. This is never going to dub down that tight because it's got those short, stiff fibers that are going to stick out. And again, if I pick that out, I can get that real good and shaggy. If you went after that with a piece of Velcro, you could make that little bit of dubbing drape well back over the back of the hook. So you're just starting to see some of the different textures there. Those middle 3 or 4 are so close together in color, it's hard to tell the difference, but you get the idea of what I'm after here. Antron dubbing is not only a short coarse dubbing, I should talk about this. So that trilobal Antron there. There's also long, fine Antron dubbing. If I hold this up here, you can see this. So this is a fairly long, 1.5 to 2 inch long staple length, fairly fine, so long, fine dubbing fiber. And this is what I would use for a fly like a stimulator. It comes in very nice, bright colors. Oop, get that back up there. Nice, bright colors. And it's pretty spongy. This stuff is made not to mat together. So you can see as tightly as I move that on there, I can move that up and down the thread, even on that polyester thread. It just doesn't grab very well. It's very slick. It's made not to stick to itself, which is sort of counterintuitive for a dubbing, but it does make a nice, bright, shiny body. Doesn't tend to pick out very well because it's so long. You can kind of pick it out a little bit, but you'd really have to get after it to get in there and get, you can see when I really get after it with that wire brush, that's going to encompass the whole rest of that hook. So just different lengths, different textures on all of those dubbings. I'm going to probably move to a different hook here to show you some of these coarsest dubbings. I've got one stashed here somewhere. And I'm going to come in with just a bigger thread on this as well. So this is 6/0 unithread. So same polyester, same corded texture, just slightly bigger thread, 135 denier. And let's use one of the most popular dubbings going these days. This is ice dubbing. Ice dubbing is a shredded mylar, so fairly long staple length, but still fairly coarse. And this you can, if you go down in I'll show you a couple tricks with this. If you go down and get just the very edge of it, you can get it on there pretty small and thin. You can also go at it pretty heavily, and that's where I like these coarser dubbings, is they build bulk very quickly, so I can make a big, thick noodle of dubbing. like so. So if I want to build a fat-bodied fly or a big-bodied nymph or a streamer body, baby ganga for instance, I can build that body very quickly with that coarse dubbing. I don't need to build that or twist that down as tightly as I would with a finer dubbing, and I don't have to use near as much. It goes much faster. Um, Arizona synthetic, what is this? This is semi-seal. Arizona semi-seal is a synthetic dubbing that is very coarse. This is one of the coarsest dubbings you can get. A lot of acrylic in this. I don't know that there's any natural fiber in this anymore. It used to have mohair in it, but I'm not sure that it does. I think it's all entirely synthetic these days. This is a very coarse, very stiff dubbing that just isn't going to dub down very tight in a conventional manner. Best probably applied with a dubbing loop. And that's about as tight as I can get that there. If I reel that up, you can kind of get a view of that. And you can see how it's sort of twisted around the hook. I'm just not going to come out and build a beautiful smooth body like you might want out of a beaver dubbing. But when you get it on the hook and pick it out, it shags out beautifully. Again, just a nice long coarse fiber. So you're starting to kind of see where these different applications come into play. Speaking of dubbing loops, to make a dubbing loop, we might as well talk about this as well. This is a Dynaking dubbing reel, which you can't currently get. Hopefully the guys over in Montrose are going to start making this again. There's 8 million different dubbing reel tools. This is the one I like. This is the one we have in the drawer, so I'm going to use it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out twice the length of thread that I want my dubbing loop to be. And I don't need a very long one here, so I'm going to say that's maybe 6 or 8 inches. I'm going to make a loop. I'm going to put the tool in the loop, come up over the hook and make a few turns, go around the base of the loop and catch it close. So I've just made a loop here under the hook, and the legs of the tool are holding the legs of the loop open. Now what I tend to do is take one leg and put it in my material spring so that doesn't twist up with my thread while I grab my dubbing and do whatever I need to do from there. But if I took some of this Arizona dubbing and sort of align it lengthwise into a lengthwise bundle, like so, I can then pick up my loop and put the dubbing between the two strands. I'm going to move my thread forward here so it's out of the way. And then I'd pinch the loops right below the dubbing and spin the tool. And I tend to let that twist just kind of build up in my fingers till it works its way up the thread. You can kind of control the amount of twist. I tend to not to like to go too tight because I want it to stay buggy, but you can see how shaggy that application is going to be. It takes a little bit longer, makes a much bigger, shaggier type of body. That does not mean it's limited only to big flies. You could put beaver dubbing in a dubbing loop if you wanted. It's going to give you a shaggier look overall, and you can see I can use the tool to actually wrap that material. And then I can tie that off. Clip that stub end out of there, get a few turns on there, and then come in with that wire brush, and you'll see how shaggy that gets. And the more you get after it, now you're starting to kind of see where a mohair leech or a balanced leech kind of body would be built with that coarser material. And when I really get after everything that's on that hook, you can see it all starts to blend together because I'm starting to pull those fibers out of the twist and let them shag back off the back of the hook. Believe it or not, that right there would catch fish just fine. I think Max could even catch fish on that. All right, so I'm going to whip finish that one. Let me see if I covered all my points. Feeding, applying, twisting. End's got to be tight. Draw the thread toward you. Don't pull it straight down. Just gives you a little more clearance on the hook. Natural, synthetic, short, long, fine, coarse. I feel like I'm short of my 34 minutes. Where am I at, Max? 29. You thought I was done. I'm not done. I've got about, I think, 5 more minutes of talking. You can also, just while we're on the subject of this, you can dub a lot of different materials. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that's sold as dubbing. And Max actually brought this up earlier, which is a good and valid point. I've got a small hook here, so I'm going to use it. You can dub a lot of materials as far as the verb part. You can twist a lot of different materials around your thread. You can take a CDC feather like this, and you can peel these off. And really what I would usually do is peel them off, but you can see they've got these little hooks on on the bottom end, I'd cut those out of there. But you can take a little pinch of CDC like this and actually dub this onto the thread like fur to make a little caddis body type of thing. You can do the same thing with marabou. You can take a little pinch of marabou, cut those little hooks off the end. And what I tend to like to do with marabou is sort of tear it into a shorter length. So I just tore the tips off that. I can take that marabou and twist it around the thread and build a body out of that. I used to tie a little Callibatus nymph that dubbed marabou made a beautiful little abdomen on, lots of gills, lots of little flowy parts on it. A lot of different materials that you can actually twist around the thread to make a body. So don't feel like that you're only limited to one packaged material to do this with. Also keep in mind you can always mix different dubbings. You could mix, by all means, these are not necessarily the best colors to do it with, but if I took a little bit of that possum dubbing and a little bit of that ice dubbing, I can take these two and just stack them one on top of the other and just pull them apart and restack them. And this is just hand mixing to add a little flash into that possum dubbing. You can do that with two different colors of the same dubbing, blending it just like paint. You can do it with like I say, the Ziploc bag and a can of air is another way to do it. But if you're just doing a few flies, you saw what I just did there, two little pinches. I've got enough for 8 or 10 flies right there. So you can mix different textures. You can mix different kinds. Long fiber dubbings tend to only mix well with other long fiber dubbings. If I tried to mix this with this possum, it's not going to mix together very well just because the consistencies are so different. But if I took that whole clump and cut it in half and made that Antron a little shorter, I can get that where it will mix. So it's just a matter of matching the lengths more so than the consistency. So now I've got a long fine dubbing and a short natural coarse dubbing that's mixed together, and I've got some weird grayish blue color that'll be perfect for something. I don't know what, but you get the idea. I think I've used up I'm close enough to my 34 minutes. I don't think I missed anything. If you have questions, call Max. If you have compliments, put them in the comments below, addressed specifically to me. All caps, please. I'm old. I can't read very well. I can't see very well. So that's my story for the day. Thank you for watching. I hope that helped. This is a confusing subject. I get asked about it all the time, and it's kind of scatterbrained and all over the place, so you probably have to watch this a few times. But if it helped, let me know. If it didn't help, keep it to yourself. Thanks for watching.